Seeing no more lights, if you want to continue with your presentation.
Sure. Just the third category that we heard from the CIP hearing had to do with what those individual capital projects are that are in the CIP that we heard testimony on. So I did just want to call attention to some of them. So we heard quite a bit about Summit Hall, and there's two aspects to that. One is the state of the facility, which we'll be addressing as we move forward, and we assess the facility, and we have a detailed analysis through our key facility indicators, our KFIs, about what work needs to get done that would then get programmed in a future CIP. But there's also the overutilization issue, and we heard about the number of portables and the length of time that school has had that. And that overutilization we intend to address through the building of Gaithersburg Elementary School number 8. And so that's the plan there, and I did just want to call attention to that. We heard a lot from Stonegate over the time we were there, and at the end we heard one of the last testimonies had to do with South Lake. Those are two schools that we have highlighted for the board, and Ms. O'Neill did point that out at the hearing, that schools that we intend to address the infrastructure needs through a major capital project. Lake Seneca, we heard of overutilization, and we do have a proposed addition project there with planning funds recommended in FY20, so I just want to share that. And Poolesville High School, I think it's important just to bring back, just along with the other high schools, that we will be looking at those separately in a more expansive, comprehensive approach, separate from the elementary and middle major capital projects. Mr. Durso did send a letter to the town of Poolesville expressing our interest in finding creative ways to co-locate, and we intend to, after the CIP, to send something to the county government expressing our interest to work with the county government in thinking about ways to have a multi-agency approach to Poolesville. So I just want to pause there and see if there's questions or discussion on these topics.
Well, Dr. Daca.
Yeah, co-location at Poolesville, I think is totally important, and I hope that the county council understands that. They have a library that's in a shopping center. They have no medical facilities. You have to go 13 miles and maybe even more to get to Rockville. If you go to Gaithersburg, it's 16 miles. I mean, there are a lot of things that they're not getting, and if we could do that, and if the county council would budget for that, it would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Ms. Orman-Faust.
Excellent points, Dr. Daca, and I agree with all of them. Thank you. And we've talked about, we had an innovative facilities work group for several years, and that was one of the things that we talked about is moving towards co-location. So I'm fully supportive of that as well, even though I won't be here to do whatever needs to be done. I'm glad others are. Thank you so much to Dr. Zuckerman and the team for coming up with this list and listening carefully to our parents. I think it's really important to them as stakeholders to see that their needs and concerns have been heard, and I think that's really gratifying for them. I think one of the students, going back to the transparency issue on the maintenance and all that stuff, and to Ms. Tadakonda's point of staying in touch with the students, one of the students said it shouldn't be that the greasy squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? It should be that there's equity in the way all of the issues are addressed at all schools, and I think she made a really good point. And that's why I think that communication with our students at all our schools, and to keep them in wherever we're doing our work, to have them at the table is just really, really important. And then the more transparency, as my colleagues have said, the better around all of these and how we're doing these processes, I think, is really important. But thank you again for this summary. A lot of my big issues are up here. So,
Ms. Mondrosky?
Yeah, I just want to mention, for in case anybody watching or whatever, that because schools like Neilsville and whatnot aren't specifically listed here, doesn't mean that we're not focusing on them as well. Just because Burnt Mills and a lot of the others.
Yeah, maybe we'll take a minute to talk about Neilsville.
Neilsville should be up there.
Yeah, I would think so, but
so
I just didn't want anyone to think.
Put in the South Lake and Stonegate category.
Yes,
so thank you,
sure.
Ms. Mondrowski, for pointing that out. That is an oversight on my part.
Well, and I will just say we were trying to capture some of the themes of the testimony. We weren't trying to catalog all of it because there was so much in the interest of time, but we absolutely don't want people to feel left out. To your point, so many of the concerns from Wooten, from Neilsville, from Burnt Mills, again, those are also projects that are embedded within the capital budget. So I, appreciate the sensitivity of the line that we're trying to walk here. So, but we were not trying to exclude people by doing that.
So Ms. Ortman-Faust.
Just one more thing to that point is, I was talking with Ms. Smondrowski the other day and saying, all these people are apoplectic about things that we actually have in the plan. They're in the plan. And then I said, but you know what? In past years, they were in the plan, and then they got bumped. And I totally understand why they're still upset, because if you don't advocate, you might lose again. And that's why it's like when the county executive recommended last year that we get those cuts to spending affordability guidelines, and we had to make those delay, that directly impacted these schools. That wasn't our choice. It's not our choice when we cut these funds and they get delayed. And I think that's another disconnect that our students don't understand, and our staff as well, that we don't want anybody to be delayed. This is, as Dr. Daka said, this is a funding issue.
Valid point, Ms. Ortman-Faust. Ms. O'Neill?
Well, yeah, that was my point the other night when I said, South Lake, Neilsville, Burnt Mills are all in this CIP, but yes, everything in there is contingent upon funding. Last year with the back and forth, we had requested Lee, and then it was delayed because of the action of the county executive. And the council would put it back on track, but ultimately everybody's like, the board cut this, and no, we actually include this in the request. And so, when we take action on the 27th and we send it forward, then the real effort is with the county executive and the county council to make sure that it is funded. And, even with the enhancement, even with the, change to the key facility indicators, we still have a whole long list of schools that need attention. That's why the issue of PLAR and bathroom renovation and systemic projects like roofs and air conditioning, window replacements are going to be so key, because it's still an incredibly long time before our buildings get attention. 50 years for a high school and 40 years for a middle school is a long time. If you live in your house, your roof is probably only going to last 20 to 25 years, unless you have a slate roof. And if you have your furnace, your hot water heater, air conditioning are not going to last anywhere near 50 years. So, and if you don't repair them, then, you're going to have leaks and all sorts of bad things happening. So, our schools are our houses for our kids, and they require upkeep. And it takes money.
Okay. Oh, Ms. Dixon.
Yeah. I just wanted to say to you guys, I know you've heard a lot of concerns and, a lot of advocacy, from different schools, but I think you've really done a very, very good job of prioritizing and moving, ahead with those that are really, really in need of, renovation, fixing, whatever it is we do. And so I think you should be very proud of that. So.
Thank you.
Ms. Ortman-Faust.
Thank you for recognizing that, Ms. Dixon. I think that really is important. I think we're moving in new directions of effectiveness and efficiency, and I really appreciate the team's incredibly hard work on all of that. The one other thing that you had mentioned about fences, not only is it the fire issue about fences, but also neighborhoods want access to those fields as well. And when we've tried to lock those fences because the schools want to be, as you know, we've gotten huge pushback from neighborhoods that say we want access to those fields or public property.
They like to walk around.
Right, or all that. So it's an issue.
Yep.
Unfortunately.
I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, it just goes to show you just with so much, there's trade-offs, and it's about balancing those. I think that there's a good opportunity just to transition to the next slide. I'll be very brief, but I think the conversation that Ms. O'Neill just started around, and Ms. Ortman-Faust started as well, just around funding constraints, this really speaks to why we have pivoted. If you're right, for years we'd hear testimony about keeping the funding, and ultimately I think it's just helpful to see that the reason for the major capital projects and this approach is to address, to try to do more with less. That's I don't know if we'll be able to accomplish that, but that's an explicit goal and objective here. If you look at just the years, you go back to 1993 when funding was very plentiful, you can see how many RevAcs, or at that time modernizations, we were able to do. That started to tailor off from 01 to 15, and the time will tell what we're able to do. And I just think it's a good reminder that we have to advocate for the funding, not just locally, but at the state level. I know the board will be meeting with the delegation for its annual meeting right after Thanksgiving break. I'm sure this topic will come up because it comes up every year. But it is funding dependent. And then we will do the best we can with the funding we have to prioritize along the lines that Ms. Dixon just highlighted. So I just wanted to call attention to that. If there's any questions or discussion, now would be a good time before we transition to the next part of the work session.
When we meet with the delegation, I think we need, a little cheat sheet on the scope of our needs. I know we've talked to Ms. Susskind about it, but, the roofs, the systemic projects, and then the seats, what it will take for seats, and then the issue of our aging schools, because they're all three components. But, just back of the envelope, short, not this, but, so that they can say we have $800 million in systemic projects that need, that's roofs, furnaces, boilers, heat, HVAC, windows, etc., and then the seat number.
And we're working on that. I know the agenda went out. I know there's a focus on the Kerwin Commission and the MSD report card, but we will make sure that we get to these capital items before the meeting is over.
Okay. Continue. Yeah, thank you.
So we want to transition a little bit to another theme that has been certainly come up at the board table as well as at the hearings, and really wanting to understand the idea of where our school utilization is in the county. We know that we have